General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, July 30th reveal that Michael was faced with a decision that would reshape not only his future but the entire structure of his family. The moment he discovered Willow had vanished from her own wedding, a ceremony built on the illusion of redemption, unity, and second chances, everything inside him shattered. The news hit him with such intensity that it felt like a silent explosion, one that echoed through every chamber of his soul. What was supposed to be a celebration of closure had turned into a haunting symbol of betrayal, forcing Michael to confront the stark reality that the woman he once loved had once again slipped through his grasp, this time not just emotionally but physically. Her escape was not just a rejection of Drew, it was a rejection of the life Michael had helped build for her, of the sacrifices he had made, of the children they were trying to raise in some semblance of peace. Now, standing amidst the wreckage of a wedding that never reached its vows, Michael knew that something fundamental had shifted. Willow's decision to flee wasn't just about her fears, it was a declaration of war against the manipulation and secrecy that had infected their lives. And Michael, standing on the edge of this unraveling, understood that he had to make the kind of decision that would change everything, to protect Wiley and Amelia by removing Willow from their lives entirely. It was drastic. It was painful. And to many, it would seem cruel. But in Michael's eyes, it was the only way to shield his children from further chaos. If Willow was running from Drew, what was she capable of doing next? Could she be trusted with the hearts and minds of the children she had once walked away from? Could she be trusted not to disappear again? This wasn't a decision made in anger, though the fury coursing through Michael's veins was undeniable. It was a decision forged in heartbreak. In the bitter realization that the person he had once believed was strong enough to fight for her family had become a source of instability. And yet, even as he wrestled with the implications of cutting Willow out, Michael couldn't ignore the haunting whispers of doubt. Was this really about protecting his children? Or was it about punishing Willow for choosing her own path? Was he becoming the very thing he had once feared Drew would become? A man so consumed by control that he'd deny love in the name of order? The fallout from Willow's disappearance was immediate and far-reaching. Carly was stunned, trying to make sense of her daughter-in-law's retreat, while Jocelyn quietly questioned whether this chaos was truly over, or if it was only just beginning. Drew, humiliated in front of the town, now carried the public weight of abandonment, while privately nursing the wounds of a love that had slipped through his fingers. And in the shadows, those like Nina and Sidwell watched with satisfaction or malice, seeing opportunity in the Corinthos family's internal fracture. But for Michael, the pain was more personal. It was about late nights rocking a crying child while Willow disappeared into herself. It was about watching Amelia cling to him because her mother had become a stranger. It was about broken promises and endless forgiveness until even the strongest heart gave out. So when he began preparing custody filings, securing legal counsel, and drawing hard boundaries, he wasn't doing it for revenge. He was doing it because he refused to let history repeat itself. Still, part of him mourned. Not just for Willow, but for the version of their love that once existed, a love born from tragedy, tested by disease, and ultimately undone by deception. That kind of love didn't die easily. It festered. It lingered in the silence between phone calls and the empty chair at breakfast. But Michael also knew that lingering love was not the same as trust. And right now, he had to build a future rooted in the latter. The entire town was watching, rumors swirling, opinions forming. Was Michael being too harsh? Was Willow misunderstood? But none of that mattered to him anymore. The truth was simple. The woman who walked out of the church and never came back had also walked out of her responsibility to her children. And Michael, no matter how conflicted, was stepping into the role of protector with renewed intensity. This decision would define him. It would reshape his relationship with Carly, test the loyalty of Jocelyn, and perhaps even pull him closer to Sonny in ways that would have once terrified him. Because now, more than ever, Michael understood what it meant to lead a family under siege. And just like his father had done for years, he was ready to sacrifice love for the safety of those he vowed to protect. Even if that meant locking the door behind Willow for good. Rick was ready with a smile and a carefully laid trap when his new client stepped through the door, a client whose agenda promised to set Port Charles ablaze once more. The name on the file was already buzzing with controversy: Nina. After the explosive unraveling of Willow's wedding. After Drew stood humiliated at the altar and Curtis's betrayal cracked old friendships wide open, Nina had reached her breaking point. Her fury wasn't the quiet, simmering kind. It was calculated. It was weaponized. And Rick, ever the opportunist, was more than willing to become her new instrument of destruction. The fallout from the wedding had pushed Nina to the edge. She had nearly confessed the truth herself, tried to stop the disaster before it unfolded, but Curtis beat her to it, robbing her of control, of dignity, and most importantly, of her daughter's trust. Now, with Willow vanished and Drew rapidly descending into his own rage spiral, Nina was convinced the only way forward was through vengeance. She didn't need sympathy. She didn't want understanding. What she craved now was power, and Rick Lansing was exactly the kind of man who could help her reclaim it. As Rick poured a drink and gestured for her to sit, he already understood what she was planning. Curtis had painted himself as the savior, the righteous whistleblower, but Nina saw right through him. To her, Curtis was no hero, he was a traitor. And Drew, for all his self-righteous speeches and public humiliation, had willingly seduced her in the shadows, only to hide their affair behind the mask of a noble man seeking redemption. Nina had lost everything because of their schemes, her daughter, her credibility, her place in Michael's circle, and now it was time to strike back. Rick had handled darker clients before. But there was something different about Nina this time. Her fury wasn't just personal, it was strategic. She wanted to take down Curtis and Drew simultaneously. She wanted Curtis arrested and disgraced, perhaps with the ketamine plot she'd quietly fed to Rick months earlier. She wanted Drew publicly ruined. Discredited in front of those who still believed he was the safer alternative to Sonny. Rick, ever pragmatic, had already begun crafting the framework of legal attacks, false narratives, and public manipulation that would make both men squirm. And Nina didn't flinch once. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reshaping Port Charles in her image. The chaos following the wedding had left gaping power vacuums, emotional scars, and deep cracks in once solid alliances. Nina planned to exploit every single one of them. And Rick? He was more than happy to hold the pen while she rewrote the future. Because the truth was, he didn't like Curtis or Drew either. They had both interfered in his world too many times. Watching them burn would be almost therapeutic. But what neither of them could yet predict was how deeply these plans would spiral. Once Curtis realized Nina was behind the mounting legal case against him, and once Drew began receiving threats that risked his custody of Scout, the men would retaliate. Portia would be dragged into the mess. Willow, still missing, might never return. Michael would be torn between rage and guilt. And Sonny, from the shadows, would eventually sense that Nina's new warpath would demand blood. The deeper Nina went into the plan, the more detached from consequence she became. Rick noticed it in her voice, no more tremble. No more doubt. She didn't care how many people had to fall so long as she reclaimed the narrative. This wasn't the same Nina who once pleaded for forgiveness. This was a woman reborn in fury. A woman who believed betrayal should be punished with obliteration. And yet, the danger of aligning with Rick was not lost on her. He was a man who had danced with the devil too many times. Always stepping just far enough to avoid getting burned. But Nina welcomed the fire now. She welcomed the scandal, the exposure, the storm that was coming. Because when it was all over, when Curtis was in a cell and Drew's name was dragged through the mud, Nina believed she would be standing taller than ever. The last survivor of a war she had no choice but to start. Port Charles was on the edge of collapse, and Rick had just unlocked the gates. Nina, in heels and vengeance, was already marching through. Trina and Curtis stood at the edge of a fragile bridge, one that had been shattered by secrets, betrayals, and emotional distance, yet now trembled with the possibility of repair. For too long. Their bond as father and daughter had been overshadowed by lies and silence. The truth about Curtis's choices, the darkness he had allowed to fester in the name of protection, and the sacrifices Trina had endured alone had driven a wedge between them. But now, in the wake of chaos sweeping across Port Charles, chaos born of Nina's retaliation, Drew's downfall, and Curtis's looming legal trouble, they found themselves unexpectedly on the same side. They didn't need empty apologies anymore, they needed unity. They needed strategy. Most of all, they needed each other. The situation was growing increasingly volatile. With Curtis facing public disgrace and possible imprisonment due to the unfolding scandal involving Drew's alleged drugging, and with Portia in hiding, the Ashford family name was on the brink of collapse. Trina, once the moral compass and steady voice of reason, was being pulled into the gravitational force of her parents' decisions. She had tried to maintain her own path, dedicated to her studies, her friendships, her love for Spencer, but now the world around her demanded more. Curtis was under siege, falsely accused but haunted by past actions that made the charges almost believable. Trina could see through the narrative, yet she also knew perception was everything in Port Charles. That was why they needed each other. Curtis could no longer navigate this storm alone. Not with enemies in every shadow and allies slipping through his fingers. And Trina, as much as she longed for peace, recognized that silence would only let the lies grow louder. In her heart, she had always seen Curtis as someone capable of redemption. This was the moment to prove it. Together, they began to coordinate their efforts to control the damage, to investigate who truly framed Curtis, and to determine what role Nina or even Rick might have played in manufacturing this mess. As they worked together, old tensions softened. Curtis, for once, let his guard down and admitted the fear that had driven so many of his mistakes. Trina, in turn, allowed herself to express how deeply those mistakes had affected her. It wasn't about blame anymore, it was about survival, and about rebuilding something real amid the wreckage. Their conversations stopped being defensive and started becoming strategic. They discussed who could be trusted, what legal maneuvers might save Curtis from a conviction, and whether reaching out to Anna or even Jason might be a necessary risk. The most powerful part of their renewed alliance, however, was not the logistics, it was the emotional honesty. Curtis finally acknowledged the emotional toll Trina had carried in silence. Trina admitted that she didn't want a perfect father, she just wanted a present one. The past couldn't be undone, but the future still held room for something better. And so, as they faced down threats from all directions, Nina's vengeful plots, Rick's manipulations, the public's thirst for scandal, they also found strength in each other. Not just as a daughter and father, but as equals in a shared mission to survive and reclaim their lives. Their bond, once fractured, now burned bright with renewed purpose. Trina no longer felt like a bystander to her family's downfall. She was at the center of the resistance. And Curtis, long consumed by pride and guilt, finally stepped into the role of protector, not with ego, but with humility. Port Charles was falling into chaos, but amidst the noise, one truth rang clear: Trina and Curtis had found their way back to each other. And together, they would not only weather the storm, they would change its course. Nina continued to prove that she had not lost her touch when it came to executing quiet, calculated moves behind the scenes. Even as Port Charles reeled from the chaos surrounding Drew, Willow, Curtis, and Michael, Nina moved like a shadow between power plays, gathering information, manipulating alliances, and crafting a web of control that only a few could perceive. Her ability to operate in silence while everyone else shouted their accusations made her more dangerous than ever. The recent betrayal she suffered at the wedding, watching everything unravel just as she was about to regain a piece of her family, lit a fire inside her that she no longer tried to contain. She was no longer seeking forgiveness. She was seeking leverage. The narrative unfolding was no longer just about revenge or heartbreak. It had evolved into something deeper, something darker. A mission to reclaim her place in a world that had tried to exile her. With Curtis now behind bars and Drew's credibility in shambles, Nina was setting the pieces for something far greater. The moves she was making weren't just about punishment, they were about permanence. She intended to expose truths others had buried and weaponize the secrets they thought would remain hidden. What she lacked in brute force, she made up for in precision. And with Rick now aligning with her goals, she had found a legal conduit to twist the system to her favor. As she continued to adjust the narrative, one obsession grew clearer: the truth. But not the kind of truth that frees people, rather, the kind that traps them, unmasks them, and burns away their facades. Every step she took uncovered another layer of manipulation in Port Charles, another lie wrapped in loyalty. Mina had been underestimated before, cast aside as a liability or an emotional wildcard. But now she was in full control of her image, her targets, and her timing. The haunting feeling that she was always one step away from losing everything had vanished. In its place was something far more potent: cold, methodical intent. The adjustments she made were not always visible to the naked eye, but they were seismic beneath the surface. Whether through planting evidence, exploiting legal loopholes, or leaking carefully chosen information to the press, Mina's influence began to reshape how people viewed the events around them. Friends turned suspicious of one another. Enemies began doubting their own plans. The air in Port Charles grew thick with uncertainty, and at the center of it all stood Mina, quietly ensuring every truth that emerged served her purpose. In a town filled with villains hiding behind virtue, Mina was choosing clarity over illusion. Her enemies had tried to bury her with shame and guilt. But instead they had awakened something far more dangerous. The truth was no longer just a consequence, it was her weapon. And with it, she would reshape everything. Liz wasn't expecting anyone that evening, especially not someone whose presence always came with a weight too heavy to ignore. But when Jason appeared at her door, there was no hesitation in letting him in, only the unspoken knowledge that whatever brought him here meant something had shifted. His arrival wasn't a casual visit, it was a signal that the web of secrets in Port Charles was unraveling again, and Liz, as always, was about to be pulled into its center. The atmosphere between them was thick with memories, but Jason wasted no time. He had questions, about Britt, about the shadow surrounding her supposed death, about what might have been missed. Liz could feel the familiar pull of anxiety as Jason laid out what he had uncovered in Paris and what he suspected was happening in Dubrovnik. The name Britt, once a source of lingering pain and quiet hope, now carried new implications. Jason's eyes burned with determination, but behind them, Liz saw something else: fear. Not for himself, but for the truths he was chasing and the damage they could bring. As he spoke of surveillance footage, falsified medical records, and whispers of laboratory ties, Liz realized this wasn't about closure, it was about the possibility that Britt had never died at all. The emotional impact was immediate. A wave of guilt swept through Liz, not just for what she might have overlooked, but for the knowledge that if Britt was alive, she might have been suffering in silence. Trapped in a lie constructed by those far more powerful than anyone had dared to imagine. Jason's visit wasn't just a request for information. It was a cry for clarity in a world clouded by half-truths and deliberate obfuscation. And Liz, no stranger to the trauma of hidden realities, felt a chilling familiarity in every word he said. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the pattern became. Conversations veered toward Sidwell, Dalton, and a project so clandestine that even the WSB had refused to acknowledge its existence. Liz, haunted by the memory of a dying Britt and a grieving Liesel, now found herself questioning the authenticity of those moments. Could a woman like Britt truly vanish under such extraordinary circumstances without leaving behind any trace, unless it had all been orchestrated? Jason believed so. And his instincts were rarely wrong. This new reality pressed down on Liz like a storm surge. She felt the weight of the past, her loyalty, her losses, her choices, all crashing against the urgency of the present. Jason was determined to uncover the truth. And she was once again tethered to a quest that might cost them both more than they could imagine. The changes sweeping through Port Charles weren't random. They were targeted, deliberate, and devastating. And now that Jason had chosen to pull Liz into this mission, she knew the road ahead would not just challenge what they believed, but redefine what they feared. Every instinct screamed that this was the beginning of something catastrophic. The emotional cost of Brit's potential survival, the lies keeping her hidden, and the powerful forces willing to kill to protect that secret meant that Jason and Liz weren't just searching for answers, they were becoming enemies of a machine too large to see in full. But still, they moved forward. Because in a town like Port Charles, truth didn't just hurt, it hunted. And now, it was coming for all of them.